I'm Algenon Cash, and you're locked in. Welcome back. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me for yet another episode. So much going on. Looks like 2021 is trying to show 2020 what it's all about. So we thought 2020 was exciting, but 2021 is off to an incredible start as well. We are now just literally about 24 hours away from the 46th president of the United States being sworn in, President-elect Joe Biden, as well as Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who will be the first woman of color to hold that office and the first woman. So we've got some history being set here in the next 24 hours, but we also had history being set in the past week with President Donald Trump becoming the only president to be impeached twice, not once, but twice. So there's only four impeachments that have ever happened in the country's history, and now Donald Trump accounts for 50% of those. And so we are really in an interesting point in American history. So I wanted to bring back a good friend of mine, Ian Pryor, who's a former DOJ official. He's also a national political commentator. You remember him. We brought him on the show to talk about the Judge Amy Coney Barrett nomination that was making its way through the Senate. But today we're going to talk about some of these open investigations that the FBI and DOJ have announced. There's 170 open cases related to the Capitol attack that happened on January 6th. Not to mention, Twitter, Facebook, some of these social media platforms are landing in hot water because they're banning, not only have they banned the president, but they're banning other conservative commentators. So we're going to hit on that. And then we'll also get Ian's reaction just to the impeachment itself, just sort of what he thought about it and sort of what the mood and climate is right now in Washington, D.C. Ian Pryor, welcome back, man. How you been doing?
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Well, yeah, man. It feels like everything that I just said since the last time I talked to you a few months ago. You would have thought maybe we've been through two presidential terms since the last time you and I talked, but we're actually still in the same one. What's your current mood and climate about national politics right now?
Well, I mean, as you said, we're sort of in unprecedented times here. I think, after the election, it just never really seemed to end. I mean, it seemed like, as some people said, an election season as opposed to election day. And I think that really dominated things going on for a while. And then, of course, you had the Georgia elections, which, I think in part Republicans weren't successful there because, of the contested election issue, because of some of the rhetoric, because people were, Republicans were staying home and they didn't think that the election would have integrity. And I think what you saw was two very close races that if we didn't have that, could have swung the other way. So, and then you add in, obviously the Capitol riots from about a week and a half ago, and inauguration and impeachment. And so it's never ending. Time just keeps on going with these. And I don't think it's going to stop. I think that people, sort of largely expect, a Biden administration, everything's going to be calmed down. It doesn't really work that way. The president, it doesn't matter who the president is. People have these abilities to now speak their mind on social media. And I don't think that mood is going to calm down anytime soon.
Yeah, you mentioned the Georgia election, which now seems like it was light years ago, but it just concluded a couple of weeks ago, and it was also history setting. First African American male to come out of Georgia, Reverend Raphael Warnock, who's going to the Senate. John Ossoff, first Jewish senator elected out of Georgia, youngest senator to be elected to the United States Senate. So just a lot of historical milestone moments through this election season, as you described it. I want to go back to that point you made about election season, because obviously the president has went through his second impeachment. He's been charged with inciting violence as it relates to the attack on the Capitol. Many, including myself, don't believe that the actual speech that he gave at the rally prior to the attack on the Capitol, I personally don't believe that meets the bar of inciting violence. I'd love to get your legal reaction to that. But I do think, and I think many agree with me. I do think that the president's rhetoric after the election and his refusal to accept the results and these constant cries of foul and this was a fraudulent election, I do think all that rhetoric did sort of lead to inflaming these people's opinion and thoughts about the election, and them also believing this idea that their vote had been stolen from them. Can you comment on that a little bit? I mean, from a legal perspective, did the president incite violence? But then also, just what's your political reaction to some of the rhetoric that occurred after the election?
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly on the legal standard. I mean, it comes from Brandenburg versus Ohio. That's a Supreme Court case that really clarified what incitement was. If you read his speech, he said, go on there and, cheer on the folks that are supporting us and do it peacefully. In no way does that meet the legal standard for incitement. And, my personal view is if you're going to impeach a president, you should at least be able to meet the legal standard. That said, there are lesser remedies that they could have looked at, like censure. I know that some Republicans had floated that idea. I think if you're going to do something in this case, if you want to send a message about the rhetoric that happened after the election, then I think that's more an appropriate measure than what they're trying to do. Which now it can be looked at as we're gonna try and remove someone from office after they've left office, and really what it looks like is they're just trying to prevent Trump from ever holding federal office again.
Yeah, and I also think it's a bit problematic when you have an impeachment trial, but yet you had no evidence, no witnesses, no debate, no testimonies. It was essentially majority rules, and you're impeached. Doesn't that sort of open an interesting doesn't it open an interesting door? I mean, it almost feels like now we have weaponized and politicized the impeachment process. I mean, imagine if House Republicans back in 2010, whenever, or actually 2012, when they regained the House against Barack Obama, what if they would have deployed this same tactic against Barack Obama?
Can I take a quick second to stop my kids from?
Yeah. Go right ahead, man.
Okay,
Hey, folks, we're live. This is what happens when you're zooming live. We'll give Ian a quick break there to make sure he goes and get the kids quieted down, and maybe give people a little bit more time to actually join the broadcast. While he's away, I'll take this moment to remind everyone, if you have not already done so, go check out our YouTube channel. Make sure you are a subscriber at the YouTube channel. That way you get notifications anytime we produce new content, new videos that are going up at YouTube. Also, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, which are also great places to follow. But we've also launched a new official Locked In community for those who follow my commentary, and would love for you to consider joining. There's a link that's available on the page. It's actually pinned to the top of the Facebook page, but you can click that link. There's 3 different subscription tiers that you can look at. And the proceeds from those subscriptions really go to help support just the development of the content that you're watching. It takes a lot of energy and time to be able to research and obviously reach out to guests like Ian and invite them to be on the show. And so we would certainly love for you to become an official member or contributor or raving fan of the show. Again, that link for the subscriber community is right at the top of the Facebook page. But yeah, Ian, go right ahead, man. I understand how it is when you got small kids.
Yeah, I took care of it. We're good.
You give them some ice cream sandwiches. That used to work with my daughter. She'd be quiet for at least a good hour with an ice cream sandwich.
I just sent her upstairs so I can't hear her.
No, well, no. What I was saying is, during this most recent impeachment proceeding that we went through a week ago, it just feels like to me we have now weaponized and politicized the impeachment process. There was no testimony, no witnesses, no debate, no evidence really even presented. It was majority rules. We're going to impeach the president. And I was thinking going back to when Republicans were able to gain control of the House during the Obama administration, and despite they had a lot of grievances with the president. I mean, could we only imagine if House Republicans who held a majority would have just simply impeached the president because they were disgruntled with him?
Yeah, and that's the real thing here is that, and I talked about this a lot during the first impeachment. Have we created impeachment less as a constitutional tool and more as a political tool? And I remember when when Obama was president, there were some Republicans that, and it was a few, very few, that would, every time he did something, they'd call for his impeachment. And, most sensible Republicans realized this is not a road we want to go down, that, impeachment is something that should be held for sort of the most grievous of high crimes and misdemeanors, as the Constitution says. And, I think what you have now is, look, you can be annoyed, you can be frustrated, you can be, just appalled in any of those categories by the president's rhetoric. That does not necessarily mean that it's an impeachable offense. And, I think what we see here is that Democrats are seizing the moment, seizing that visual of, people storming the Capitol. And, I think they're overreaching a bit, and they're comparing it to 9/11, which is just absurd. And they're using that to really go after the president and try and, take him out so that he doesn't have the chance to run again in 4 years.
And ultimately, the United States Senate would make that decision whether or not he would be barred from public office. Of course, they've got to decide whether or not they would even want to hold a trial to convict the president of the impeachable charges that have cleared the House. I would think that there's got to be some legal questions on whether or not the United States Senate can actually convict a president for impeachment after he's left office. And I don't believe, is there any legal precedent on that at all? I mean, in terms of what the Senate can do as we move forward, or
I don't remember his name, but there was somebody in the Ulysses S. Grant administration that was impeached and tried in the Senate after he had left office. So there's some precedent there, but that's not the president of the United States. So I don't think there's anything directly on point that you could point to either way to say this can be done or this can't be done.
yeah, I think I recall. I'm right there with you. I don't recall the gentleman's name offhand either, but I think he was a federal judge and was impeached and then was actually convicted after after leaving office. But you're right. I mean, there's no legal precedent as it relates to a president being subjected to that same process. And I think there is some language in the Constitution that doesn't necessarily consider the president just a traditional federal officer. Am I correct about that? Or
yeah, I mean I think that's accurate. I mean, it really depends on where you fall in the line of whether you're a cabinet head and you're Senate confirmed versus a regular political appointee or career appointee. There's all sorts of different standards, but certainly if you're a cabinet head, it's very similar to the rules for a president. But the president, the big difference there is that the president is an elected official, whereas the head of the Department of Defense, the head of the Department of Justice, they are appointed by an elected official. So how that all works out, I mean, I think that would be an interesting constitutional question that I'm sure we will see plenty of testimony if there's a Senate trial from constitutional law experts on both sides.
now, I also there was some debate around whether or not the Senate would be able to. Now, I know they can convict, they can remove him from office, they can bar him from running for public office. I know there was some online or social media debate whether or not the Senate would be able to strip him of certain formal presidential benefits like Secret Service protection and some other things. But the way I've interpreted it, if he fulfills his term, which means he should fulfill his term, because at this point the Senate, there's no time to actually hold a trial to convict and remove. The president Trump would still be considered a former president. Am I correct? I mean, he did fulfill his term.
Oh yeah, I mean, he would be a former president, and they could do the trial, and I expect that they probably will do the trial post. Starting, I guess the Senate's back in session today, so they could start it tomorrow. They could on Thursday, but then you look at how they're going to manage what is going to be a plethora of nominees from the Biden administration, while also having this impeachment trial, which could last up to 2 months. So it's going to be quite a mess. I'm thinking if I'm the Biden administration, the last thing I really want is for the first 2 months of my administration to be dominated by the last president. And I think that's where we're headed right now.
Yeah, and then I've even heard, House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn has suggested that the Senate trial doesn't actually happen until after Biden's first 100 days. And I gotta imagine the optics of that to the American voter would be really interesting, because you're having a Senate trial on a president who's been out of office for 3 months now. And so I definitely think that that would send some kind of a political sign to American voters who really are questioning this process right now. If you're just not joining us, you are locked in. I'm your host, Algenon Cash, and we're having a conversation with Ian Pryor, who is a former DOJ official in Washington, D.C. He's also a national political commentator. And we're talking about not only the impeachment of Donald Trump, but we're also talking about the FBI and DOJ investigation into the Capitol, the Capitol attack. And we're also going to be hitting on some of these recent decisions by Twitter and Facebook and other social media companies to actually ban some of their conservative users. Ian, you spent some time in DOJ. Obviously, we've been following a couple of the most recent press announcements that they've had. It sounds like they've opened, somewhere around 170 cases into the Capitol attack. This is the largest domestic terrorism investigation in history. Can you give my audience any insight on the process that DOJ may be going through with the FBI right now? Or
Well, it's going to be an extremely large process, run through the Department of Justice, in conjunction with U.S. attorneys' offices throughout the country, and of course the FBI. And they have to look at several things. I mean, you have the people that were in the Capitol that have already been arrested and charged. Then you're going to have people that were in the Capitol that they have not located yet, that were not caught, that are still out there somewhere. So they've got to find those people. So that's another layer of investigation that they need to work. And then there's the last piece, well, not the last piece, but the last piece of the Capitol attack is, was there any assistance provided by individuals that were not at the Capitol but knew what was going to happen? So paid for airfare, paid for hotels, knew what was going to be done by the individuals that they were helping out, because they could be accessories before the fact. They could also be part of a federal conspiracy if two or more people are planning this, regardless of whether those individuals actually went in the Capitol, or if one of them or two of them out of six. So there's going to be conspiracy potential there. So that expands sort of the potential suspects that they'd be looking at. And then you add in the investigations that are going on for inauguration. Again, you're looking for things like, first of all, you're looking to stop it, but you're also going to find things where there are conspiracy charges out there. Are people planning and have taken the active steps towards doing this, or going to the Capitol and doing something illegal, like storming the Capitol, or anything that could be potentially illegal. So they have quite a bit to do to, one, make sure that everybody that was involved in the Capitol riots the other week are held accountable, but also, two, to investigate incoming threats, and where appropriate to charge based on that.
There seems to be plenty of evidence, even leading up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol, that this was a pre-planned event, which again is the reason why I question how you can impeach President Trump for inciting something that was clearly, from evidence, you can see that it was clearly pre-planned. Even former FBI Director Jim Comey has come out and said that he thought this was a pre-planned event. It wasn't something that happened very spontaneously. There's a lot of digital footprints across social media where obviously these different groups of people were talking and planning to actually storm the actual United States Capitol building. Was there some type of an intelligence failure? I mean, why was the Capitol Police not notified by our intelligence agencies about the pre-planned attack?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, intelligence, I think it's important people understand our intelligence agencies, Central Intelligence Agency, cannot conduct intelligence gathering operations in the United States, right? They can only do it overseas. So you're really relying on the FBI. And then the FBI, in order to get information, whether it's a wiretap, they're going to need a warrant. Whether it's to, go and investigate, they need to open an investigation. So there's not sort of this mass surveillance of what's going on social media, especially if these are sort of, I hate to call them cells, but if they're loosely organized groups, it's really tough to kind of have that fulsome organization. I mean, we saw the same thing with, Antifa over the summer, where it's very similar. These are not, as organized as, international groups, right? They're sort of just, they can be anything from people that are organized, or to, a couple of people hanging out in their parents' basement on, on a chat app and deciding that they're going to do this. So, that is probably where a lot of the breakdown occurs. And again, it occurred this summer, and it occurred this January. So it's one of the things that our system is designed to protect, where you kind of have this mass surveillance state over American citizens. And, how do you balance that with the need for security? And I think, the FBI is certainly doing their part now to make sure that there's no repeat of this. But to some degree, their hands are always going to be tied when it comes to anticipating crimes, as opposed to reacting to crimes that have happened, or reacting to tips of potential crimes.
When they came out with their initial press conference, there was some criticism that there was, about a 6 or 7 day delay from the actual attack to the first press conference from DOJ and the FBI. Is that standard, or was that maybe associated with just the sheer size of the event and the actual evidence that was coming out of the event?
It's probably a combination of things. I mean, I think you never want to get out there and give a press conference until you have, solid information that you can talk about. I mean, otherwise the press conference is going to be, yeah, we're looking into it. So that, I think the size of it, I think being able to sort of find people, understand the gravity and the scope of it is one thing. I also think, look, I mean, you're dealing with a government in transition. So you have an acting attorney general. Attorney General Barr is no longer there. People generally at the higher echelons of cabinet level departments are departing. And it's very similar to, certainly when I came aboard DOJ, it was people were coming in. So we're on sort of the back end of that transition. And a lot of times things don't necessarily run like a well-oiled machine when you're in that transition phase. So I think it's probably a combination of those two things.
We're talking about some of the almost keyboard warriors that are out there that you mentioned. There's some people that might just be sitting in their mom's basement, tweeting out some things, but they don't really mean to incite any violence. Free speech advocates would argue that people should be able to say whatever they want to say, and to some degree, people that have some of the most extreme views ought to be able to express those views, because it sort of allows us to know what they're thinking, where they are, that particular idea and thought is out there. But I also believe that the emergence of social media has really complicated things. I mean, do we need to go back and look at free speech because of tools like Twitter and Facebook and Reddit and Parler and so many other things that have been created? Or
yeah, I think that I mean, think about the First Amendment. The First Amendment obviously prohibits the government, whether it's state, federal, local, from infringing on your free speech rights. That doesn't apply to private companies. But now we're in a situation where, look, the town square is not where you go to make your speeches anymore. It's the internet. It's on Twitter. It's on Facebook. It's on social media. And yes, while they are owned by by private individuals and they are part of the private sector, they have become so large and have become such a part of our information and communication ecosystem that I think we really need to. And I don't necessarily have the answer on how we do it, but we need to take a look at how that works vis-a-vis the railroads in the 1800s, or the television airwaves in the 20th century. Like, is that something we need to look at and figure out how are we going to restructure things, rework laws so that people are either guaranteed free speech on these sites, or that these sites do not have the power to take away people's free speech. So, and how that happens, I mean, I know there's a lot of different solutions. One interesting one is to make discrimination based on political affiliation a protected class, so that, discrimination laws would apply there. So there's a lot of different ways that I think, you could sort of nip around the edges to make sure that that people are able to express themselves. But I think the bigger question is, as we move forward into the future and more things are done online and in social media, how do we juxtapose that with the freedom of speech? Because eventually technology is going to swallow the First Amendment if we're not careful.
I'm not a huge fan of Twitter. I will be honest with you. I'm on Twitter. You and I have communicated through Twitter. I probably only use Twitter more so to observe some of the chatter that is out there, and sort of what people might be saying on one side or the other. And I will admit that Twitter can be helpful when it comes to maybe some of the more breaking news, just because you're getting a quicker and first reaction than you would from a LinkedIn, a Facebook, or an Instagram, some of the other platforms. But I'm actually just not I don't really use Twitter that much. But monitoring some of the Twitter chatter right now over the last couple of weeks, especially since the president was banned, there seems to be a outsized reaction from the conservative community that these platforms are specifically targeting conservative commentators. What's your reaction to that complaint or grievance?
Well, I agree with it. I think that if you're going to start censoring people on Twitter, then you've got to do it both sides. And again, you go back to the summer, right? And I hate to engage in sort of the whataboutism, but there were plenty of Democratic lawmakers saying, take to the streets, all kinds of things that, if a Republican were doing that, would probably get them banned. So when you see similar activities occurring, that can be labeled as conservatives, and they're banned, but people on the left aren't banned for similar speech, there's definitely a double standard. And so whatever you're going to do, whether you're going to allow people to say what they want or whether you're going to censor people, you gotta go both ways, and they haven't done that. And I've seen certainly tons of things where ads get marked as potential misinformation or disinformation, like regular political ads that are just anything by Republicans, but Democrats, you never get the same standard. You never get any warning labels from them. So either Twitter and everybody thinks that Democrats are always telling the truth, or there's a double standard. And maybe it's both. I don't know. Maybe they're just sort of blinded by their own kind of personal political views, that their problem is with the other side, but they're a content platform, and they cannot be solely moderating content on one side of the political equation.
I will tell you, one of my first interviews for 2021 was with Congressman Ted Budd, who's a Republican out of North Carolina, represents the 13th district, probably one of the most conservative House members in Washington, D.C. And we had a conversation about 24 hours after the attack on the Capitol building. He was also one of the lawmakers that voted against certifying the electoral certification for President-elect Joe Biden. And we had a conversation on my show. We put it on Facebook like we always do. We actually decided that we wanted to sponsor this particular conversation because it was a really good dialogue with him, and he gave a lot of context as to why he objected to the electoral certification, but it got rejected. Facebook would not allow us. Facebook would not allow us to boost this conversation, and they I think they cited that we were, spreading false information or something like that. But it wasn't false information. I mean, it was his actual congressman just expressing why he wanted to object to this electoral certification, which I thought was really, really interesting. A lot of conservatives are threatening to leave these platforms, whether it leave Twitter, leave Facebook. We need our own place to go communicate. I will tell you that personally, I'm somewhat against that idea, because I think that's conceding the battleground when you just decide to leave and no longer participate in the conversation. But you're active in these conversations. You're a national political commentator. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, do conservatives stay on these platforms and continue to sort of fight it out, or should we go find our own sandbox to play in?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. If you go find your own sandbox to play in, then it just becomes an echo chamber, and you have your, your conservative social media and your liberal social media, and they're just, it's confirmation bias all around, and it's only further going to divide America, right? I mean, you see it on Facebook where, in your neighborhood, you have certain little pages that are the conservatives will go to, and then you've got certain pages that liberals will go to, and they're talking about two totally different things. And, is that good for the long-term health of America? I don't know. I don't know if fighting on Twitter is good for the long-term health of America either. I think that, social media has, in my opinion, has really empowered the radical elements of each side of the political debate, and it's given them sort of an outsized voice that they wouldn't have had 20, 30 years ago. And as a result, our politics have shifted and become more divided as, sort of what you would call mainstream political actors have to embrace that, their base more. And so it's driving us to our extremes as, you see Democrats now doing things like you can't say father or mother or sister or brother in the house anymore. Like, what is that? That's ridiculous. But it's not to excuse Republicans either, who believe that you got Lynn Wood saying that Mike Pence needs to be tried for treason. I mean, that's insane too. And so all these things that are coming out through social media that gain traction, that are just frankly insane and ridiculous, are becoming more and more accepted rhetoric in our political system. And I think, I don't want to blame social media. Social media is just the platform for people to do this, but that's, I think, how we become so divisive over the past 15 years or so.
One of my last questions for you before I let you go. I mean, you just highlighted the political divisiveness that's happening. We're literally less than 24 hours away from inaugurating the 46th president of the United States. But as you and I were talking off air, right now, somewhere around, based on a recent poll, NBC poll that came out, somewhere around 35% of the electorate feels like the election was illegitimate. 74% of Republicans feel like their vote was stolen from them, as well as about 30% of independents. What does a president, Joe Biden, need to do in his first 100 days to basically bring us back together? Or can he even bring us back together? Is that even possible?
I think it's going to be tough to do. I think what you're seeing from the Biden administration is specifically, they're focusing on COVID relief, which is it's going to be bipartisan. It's going to be popular. They're focusing on department level cabinet heads that I think are, not super controversial, most of them. But I think if you look sort of below those kind of shiny hood ornaments at the top, you're going to see the engine that's going to drive the Biden agenda, and you're going to get some people that are very far left, that have very far left ideas that are going to appease, sort of the radical element of the Democrat Party. So, I think on the top line, it's going to be all about unification. I think once you actually get into the details of the policy, you're going to see that this is really just a grab bag for the special interests on the left. Now, will he be able to bring the country together? I think it's going to be really hard. I think that to do that, you kind of need a transcendent president that has that ability, and I don't think that Biden is that guy. I mean, he by all accounts, he looks like a caretaker. He's going to go in there and try not to, make too much controversy. But I think you're going to need a little bit more of that, more than that, to really bring America together, so that there's, more common ground. People are, less dug into their corners, and, and less everything about Trump. I mean, I can't get into an argument with somebody on the left about a policy debate without it coming back to Trump, So I think that, and that's, I mean, I voted for Trump. I think he's done some good things, for sure. But the issue is, you can have these debates, like you can have the debate about banning people on Twitter, and not be a Trump fan. I mean, look at Angela Merkel, she, the German chancellor, who basically came out and said, no, they shouldn't be doing this. And she's no fan of President Trump. But that's part of the problem in our country is that, now the left, it's, well, Trump, 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 Trump. And then on the right, a lot of it is, well, you're not far right enough, so you need to be prosecuted or you need to be tried for treason. So it's really hard, and it's going to be really hard for anybody to crack that code and stop sort of the perpetual cycle of outrage.
No, I think you're right, Ian. I think it's I think President-elect Biden will have a tough road to hoe once he does get into office. And unfortunately, we've got so many big issues that we're dealing with. We are still in the middle of a global pandemic and an economic crisis, and we're seeing eye-popping budget deficits and long-term debt that we need to be talking about. There's so much going on right now, but it does feel like, at least for the immediate future, Trump is still going to dominate the conversation. And I think some of the partisan divide throughout the country, as well as even the partisan divide within Congress, as it relates to this impeachment we just went through, I think is going to show itself quite a bit too once Biden is ready to start doing some policy making. Ian, I always appreciate you being here, man. And I told you you're on my short list. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate your insight. I know I can speak on behalf of my audience. I know they also appreciate your insight, and everything you share with us is so helpful. So we'll make sure we continue to keep inviting you. I hope you'll keep accepting
absolutely.
Those
great.
invites.
I love them.
Awesome, man. Take care, Ian. I appreciate you.
All right, take it easy.
And for my audience, I do have a new op-ed that's going to be dropping here soon. I want you to take a look at that. I'll be talking about the Trump impeachment, as well as the future of the Republican Party, and whether or not Trumpism is dead or not. So look for that op-ed coming out in the North Carolina Political News. I'll also have BJ Murphy, who is the president CEO of Magic Mountain Media and also the publisher of the North Carolina Political News. We will be having a conversation coming up in the next few days about the future of the Republican Party. I'll admit, we were actually supposed to have the conversation tonight, but BJ's got something going on with his eye. He's not feeling too well. So I told him I'd give him a few days off so he can heal and get back together. And then also on Thursday, one day after the inauguration, look for a video from me. I will break down what you can expect in the first 100 days of the Biden administration. There's going to be a lot of different policies thrown out. We're also going to have a video made that'll sort of break down and analyze some of these cabinet secretaries that Biden is nominating. So we've got lots of information, lots of content coming out for you. Again, if you like what you heard today, I'm going to need you to do two things. I need you to give me a thumbs up. Make sure you click like on this conversation. If you know someone that needs to hear it and they missed it, you can share this with them. And again, make sure you do go subscribe to our YouTube channel. And the podcast. Of course, you got to go subscribe to the podcast as well. That's available on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. And always, until next time, y'all stay locked in.